So after a surprisingly good race last time out in Spain, F1 was straight back at it a week later, with teams all headed to the streets of Monte Carlo for the Monaco Grand Prix, a race best known for prestige, close barriers and its history. Notice the absence of on-track action, because in Monaco, that's harder to find than a good Nicholas Latifi performance. Also, for those that didn't know, the Monaco Grand Prix is a race where you can actually go and watch the whole event for free, provided you have a €3 million apartment that overlooks the track from where you can watch the race. Meanwhile, over in the standings, there was a change at the top, as after Charles Leclerc had taken the early lead, Max Verstappen was now sitting in first place, as after 3 wins on the bounce, he held a 6-point lead over the Ferrari driver, with Red Bull also now 26 points up over the Scuderia in the Constructors' Championship. Helped out by the fact that halfway through the Spanish Grand Prix, while on for an easy win, the curse of Monaco struck early, with Leclerc's engine failing, subsequently forcing him to retire. Then at the other end of the standings, it was still Williams picking up the rear, as despite most of the team dyeing their hair red to jump on the Alex Albon theory, they're sadly still displaying all the pace of a sloth tortoise crossbreed. Hey guys, it's Taran and welcome to the On Track channel and to round 7 in Monaco. Before we get into it, do make sure to give the video a thumbs up if you enjoy, it always helps out with YouTube's algorithm, and hit the subscribe button if you're wanting to see some more F1 content. Now with that out of the way, let's get into my honest review of Formula 1 and the 2022 Monaco Grand Prix. So in the run-up to the weekend, a number of drivers were invited to take part in a charity football match. This was the annual running of the game, which also marked the 30th anniversary of the star team for the children charity. Drivers taking part included Fernando Alonso and Pierre Gasly, along with Max Verstappen on an opposite team to ex-Formula 1 driver Daniil Kvyat. Not the first time those two have been on opposing sides now, is it? Also competing were the Ferrari duo of Charles Leclerc and Carlos Sainz, with the Spaniard scoring twice. With a goals per game like that, I'm surprised PSG haven't already put in a £100 million bid for him. Elsewhere on the pitch, backing up the Ferrari pair in goal was none other than Formula 1 CEO Stefano Domenicali, which, let's be honest, isn't the first time F1 has been on Ferrari's side. Elsewhere, there was also a slightly more concerning story which involved the struggles of money while competing in Formula 1. This was as a couple of teams, led by Red Bull, had come out saying that the budget cap was too hard to adhere to, and that if nothing was done, we could see up to 7 teams having to miss races due to the expense of running the team. Oh, how I'd love to be a fly on the wall for how that conversation between Christian and Max goes down. And then in more general F1 news, it was revealed that the sport was looking to add a more regional calendar for the 2023 season, grouping races by location to reduce travel costs and environmental impacts, instead of whatever crazy reasoning was being used currently, because up until now, they apparently thought this was a good idea. And finally in Monaco, the tradition of practice on a Thursday had been scrapped, with FP1 and FP2 taking place on Friday like a normal race weekend, as F1 seems to be happy to get rid of some of the unique traditions, making the event more normal and more replaceable, as in recent times the race seems to have lost its untouchable status, and in the eyes of Formula 1, why have events in historically wealthy locations when you can have them in even wealthier modern ones? To start FP1, there was some encouraging news out of the McLaren garage, as we saw that after being unwell for the past week or so, Lando Norris was taking part. Which is just as well, because if you thought things were looking a bit underwhelming for McLaren this year, just imagine if Ricciardo was the lead driver. But onto the action, and we saw cars on the track. Well, sort of, as despite all the wealth that surrounds the Principality, the one thing they couldn't afford was some decent cameras. But that didn't stop us seeing some mistakes being made, the most popular of which was getting the braking wrong and going deep into turn 1. First off was Charles Leclerc making use of the escape road to spin his Ferrari around. And doing something similar later in the session was Max Verstappen, Perez and Kevin Magnussen, with the Haas being the most dramatic of the 3 cars, a big lockup also flat spotting the tyres and forcing him into the pits. Elsewhere, someone not having the best of sessions was Lewis Hamilton, with his first issue being cutting across the second part of the swimming pool chicane, and then a bit later in the session there was a wobbly moment round to back, the rear of the car getting loose and almost putting the Mercedes into the wall. And just to round off his woes, the car was bouncing around, with the Brit making his thoughts on the issues clear. And if that wasn't enough for the team, he made sure they heard him again, and again, and again. But the most noticeable event came courtesy of Haas and more specifically Mick Schumacher's power unit, with an MGU-K failure causing the car to stop in the most inconvenient location, as the Haas stopped running at the pit entry, which closed the pit lane, but then the session was red flagged, which forces the cars into the pit lane, so they opened it up again. But regardless of mistakes and incidents, at the end of the session, it was local boy Leclerc at the top of the timings. Into FP2, and if it was turn 1 causing issues in first practice, well, it was the turn of the swimming pool section for FP2. First off was Sebastian Vettel, losing the rear of his car as he went through, but he managed to channel his inner Tokyo drift and keep the car from sliding into the barriers, which wasn't the case for Daniel Ricciardo, as the McLaren driver lost it through the first swimming pool chicane and hit the barrier before sliding into the Tech Pro. And given the struggles that he's had starting the new regulations, it's exactly what he didn't need at Monaco, and the situation was made just that bit more awkward as the first thing over the radio after the crash was not, "Daniel, are you okay?" but "Is the car okay?" After the red flag and cleared debris, the attention was over to Valtteri Bottas as he got his first proper laps of the weekend, having basically missed all of FP1 with car troubles. But at least these troubles were in the garage opposed to on the track like Lewis Hamilton's, with the Brit going deep at Mirabeau and taking to the escape road. Pretty sure that's the first time Mercedes has been down there by accident. And then rounding out the session was another McLaren off the track, though luckily this time it was just Lando running deep at turn 1. On to Saturday in FP3 and the last practice session before what's considered the most important qualifying of the year, but teams decided to wait a little while before heading out, which turned the conversation in the commentary box to the weather, and while it was looking bright and sunny on Saturday, Sunday and race day presented a slightly damper picture, with a chance of a wet Monaco Grand Prix given the threat of rain, and let's be honest, we'll take anything that might help to make the race more interesting. But onto the session, and in terms of incidents, it was traffic causing problems, with Zhou in the way of Verstappen, Sainz in front of Vettel, and then Perez ahead of Russell. But because Monaco TV direction is worse than a Latifi hot lap, we got to see a grand total of 0 of those incidents. But one we did see involved Lance Stroll and the swimming pool barriers, with the Canadian going curb hopping before hitting the wall. Luckily enough, the damage wasn't severe enough to bring out a red flag, as Stroll managed to get his car back into the pits for repairs. Onto the laps that mattered, and everyone was going with soft tyre runs in preparation for qualifying, with the Ferraris and Red Bulls looking to have a comfortable gap to the rest of the field, and further back after a good Spanish Grand Prix, the Mercedes car seemed to be back to complaining like a tantruming child. But with cars staying out of the walls, mostly, the attention turned to the times, and come the end of the session, it was Sergio Perez at the top, leading both Ferrari drivers along with a fairly comfortable 4 tenths in hand to teammate Verstappen behind. So on to qualifying, and the key theme for Q1 was track evolution, as cars were fueled up for multiple runs on the same set of tyres. And with car after car improving their times, it was clear the track was improving, so much so that Charles Leclerc found himself down in P13 before quickly going to the top. But for the rest of the order in behind, with run plans as random as a YouTube upload schedule, it was anyone's guess as to who would improve next. But as it turned out, the improvements would be halted, as a mystery red flag had been called. It turned out that Yuki Tsunoda had clipped the wall, with the wheel cover breaking and putting enough debris on the track for a marshal to call a local red flag. And ironically enough, the driver affected the most was his teammate Pierre Gasly, as the French driver had to abandon his lap. And when the session was restarted with just 2:24 to go, he didn't make it round, missing the checkered flag to start his lap by mere milliseconds. Also in danger were the McLarens, with Norris sitting 15th and Ricciardo 16th, but with their final attempts managed to get into Q2. But those not through alongside Gasly were the Williams duo, rookie Zhou Guanyu and Lance Stroll, not wanting his fellow Canadian Latifi to feel left out. Then into Q2 and a slightly less eventful session, with the early times led by Red Bull and Ferrari with Leclerc at the top. And with the Monegasque seemingly distracted by seeing his name next to the number 1 at Monaco, he missed the weighbridge. But luckily enough his team were on hand to push him back onto it, as had he missed it completely there'd likely be a penalty. Now the second runs, and it was a case of if drivers could sneak through, with Sebastian Vettel being one of those. But not making it through though was Danny Rick, and at this point I've got to say it was, well, pretty predictable. Also joining him out in Q2 was Valtteri Bottas, with both Haas drivers and Yuki Tsunoda. So into Q3, and after the first runs it was the Ferrari pair 1-2, with Leclerc leading Sainz by a couple of tenths. And behind them were the Red Bulls, with Perez ahead of Verstappen as he kinda had been all weekend. But that was just the first runs, there was still time left and we all sat on the edges of our seats ready to see some more time to put down. Until Perez had other ideas, as after getting annoyed with Red Bull team orders in Spain, he decided the best way to get back at the team was by guaranteeing a Ferrari quali 1-2, with the Mexican losing the rear at Portier and going straight into the barriers, and with just 30 seconds left in the session, that locked in the order. With Leclerc in first, followed by Sainz, Perez and Verstappen, and Lando Norris beating both Mercedes and Alonso for 5th and best of the rest. But it wasn't quite over, as clearly over at Ferrari they had told Carlos he needed to be performing at the same level that Perez had been doing at Red Bull. You know, whatever he does, you need to do as well. So that's what he did, with the Spaniard also crashing at the same corner, but into the Red Bull as opposed to the barrier. with the question then being if he would receive a penalty before the race began on Sunday. So on to Sunday, and as hoped for, we had rain, but instead of starting the race and then just letting teams swap tyres, the FIA went into chaos mode, with the start delayed due to rain, a safety car formation lap, then the rain got lighter and we were all like, what the heck is going on? With the load running around, quite literally for some mechanics, before the rain got heavier, full wets made sense and we can get underway. With formation laps behind the safety car that is, with cars going as slow as possible at what is an already slow track. And then the rain got heavier again and the red flag was thrown, giving me, and probably a lot of other people, the dreaded Spa 2021 flashbacks. But in fairness, when I say the rain got heavier, it got heavier, turning the track into effectively a 3.3 kilometre long river. But once the rain got lighter, we did actually get underway with the safety car leading the cars out for a couple of laps. But despite the cars taking it slow, Latifi and Stroll both still managed to stick it in the wall. With Stroll, we'll call him Canadian Pay Driver version 1, hitting the barriers up near Casino, and Latifi, or Canadian Pay Driver version 2.0, sliding nose first into the wall at the hairpin. But with neither of those needing to retire, the race could finally be getting underway, for real. And a couple of drivers decided to instantly box for inters, whereas Leclerc and the leaders decided they would carry on with the wets, looking for a big enough gap behind for them to get out and not be held up. But someone not wanting to get held up was Pierre Gasly, as he was one of those that boxed early for inters and the pace advantage was big. So much so that something incredible happened. There was not one, but two on-track overtakes, for position at the Monaco Grand Prix, as Gasly first passed Zhou before a great move up the inside on Ricciardo after to back. Back at the top, and strategy was becoming key, with Perez and Verstappen deciding to box and fit intermediate tyres. But with a good gap behind him, Ferrari had two options with Charles Leclerc. Plan A would be to box and use the gap he had built to cover off the Red Bull undercut and maintain track position, whereas Plan B would be to stay with the wets and then box at the right time for dries, also maintaining track position. But what did Ferrari do? Plan C. The C standing for can we throw away the win at Monaco, because they chose the one option that lost them track position, bringing Leclerc in a few laps after the Red Bulls, but for intermediate tyres, meaning he was now behind Perez with both of them needing to stop again. And a bit further back while this was going on, Hamilton had also boxed for inters and was trying to get past Ocon on slow wet tyres, with the Frenchman not just instinctively throwing a white flag, but defending hard, to the point where the stewards decided he'd earned himself a 5-second penalty. But with the track drying up, it wouldn't be long before everyone was going to dry tyres, and that's what happened. But with more pit stops came more opportunity for Ferrari to mess it all up, calling Leclerc in for a double stop behind Sainz when there wasn't a big enough gap, which meant Verstappen got through for third. But at least they still had Sainz in the net lead. Surely he'd keep that? Well, not if Nicholas Latifi had anything to say about it, as Canadian Cash on Wheels decided that instead of adhering to blue flags and letting Sainz through, he'd just sit there in front of him for half a lap, which meant that when Perez pitted, he came out in the lead of the race, with the Ferrari pit wall showing their true strategic selves and turning a Monaco 1-2 into a Monaco 2-4. But on lap 27, all this racing, yes, actual racing around Monaco, was called to a halt. This was because, as per usual at every street track we visit, Mick Schumacher had crashed into the barriers, with the rear getting loose in the swimming pool section before the back half of the car was ripped away upon impact. Thankfully Mick was okay, but at this rate, with the amount of damage he's causing, even the leftover Mazepin money won't be able to cover it all. Now we wanted to continue, but with the barriers in the same state as some UK uni students after a night out, it was in need of some extensive repairs, which meant that a red flag was shown and the cars would come into the pits before the race would be restarted a little later. And given most of the track was still damp with a dry line, we had a rolling start, where every single car maintained position. And it was at this point where every car from 7th place all the way down to 18th was forced to drive at the same pace. This was because Fernando Alonso was driving so slow that I'm pretty sure your Gran in a Nissan Micra could go quicker, but because it was Monaco, nobody got past, with Hamilton stuck looking at the rear end of an Alpine for the rest of the race. And up ahead, despite Checo's mediums wearing away and causing the 3 cars behind to bunch up to him for the rest of the race, because it was Monaco, nobody got past, which left Sergio Perez to take the checkered flag, followed by Sainz, Verstappen and Leclerc, also bringing himself just 6 points off of Charles and 15 points off of Max in the standings. Anyways, that's all for now. Thank you very much for watching. Don't forget to give the video a thumbs up and subscribe if you want to see some more F1 content, but until next time, take care.